They laughed when she touched the piano seconds later. They were silent, their hearts stolen by the music they never expected from a girl they never believed in. Emily was the kind of girl who didn't talk much. She lived in a quiet little town where most people knew each other, and nothing exciting ever really happened. Her family didn't have much money, and life was mostly about school, chores, and helping her mother in the kitchen. But deep inside, Emily had a world of dreams that no one really knew about. From the time she was a little girl, Emily had been in love with music. Not just any music, she was completely drawn to the sound of the piano. Whenever she heard a piano in a movie or on the radio or in one of those videos that popped up while scrolling online, her heart would feel full. She didn't know why, but the sound of piano keys made her feel calm, happy, and sometimes even a little sad, like it was telling her stories without using any words. But there was a problem. Emily didn't own a piano. No one in her family even played music. They lived in a small 2-bedroom house, and every coin mattered. Her father worked in a factory, and her mother cleaned houses. Buying a piano or even taking music lessons was not something they could afford. Still, Emily didn't give up on her secret dream. She found other ways to learn. She started watching piano tutorials on YouTube. Every night after dinner, when the house was quiet and her homework was done, she would go to her room, put on her earphones, and watch those videos. At first, she just watched the way the fingers moved. Then she started trying to copy them on a piece of cardboard? Yes, cardboard. She had drawn piano keys on it using a black marker. She knew it sounded silly, but it was the only way she could practice. She memorized every note, every hand movement. She would close her eyes and imagine the sound. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. One day at school, notice was posted on the board. The town's annual talent show was happening in 3 weeks. Anyone from age 10 to 18 could participate. The event would be held in the community hall, and the whole town was expected to attend. There were prizes for singing, dancing, poetry, magic tricks, anything. Emily felt something spark inside her. This could be it. This could be the moment she finally shared her music with someone. She went home that day with the paper in her bag and her heart beating fast. That night, during dinner, she quietly mentioned it to her parents. "Yeah, there's a talent show next month," she said, trying to sound casual. Her parents looked up. Her mother asked gently, "And what would you like to do?" Emily hesitated, then looked down at her plate and said, "Play the piano." There was a short silence. Her father looked confused. "But we don't have a piano," he said, not unkindly. "You've never had lessons." "I've been learning," she said quickly. "Online. I've been practicing every night." Her mother gave a small, sad smile. "Sweetheart, we don't want you to be disappointed," she said softly. "You know how these things go. Some kids take lessons for years." Emily just nodded. She understood. But the spark inside her didn't go out. The next day, without telling anyone, she signed up for the show. She wrote her name under the instrumental performance section and added piano next to it. The list was pinned in the school hallway, so anyone who walked by could see it. Didn't take long for the comments to begin. "Emily, piano, are you serious?" One boy laughed. "She doesn't even go to music class." "Maybe she's going to play air piano," another girl giggled. Even some of the teachers raised their eyebrows when they saw her name on the list, but Emily said nothing. She walked past the whispers and smirks, keeping her eyes down. Felt embarrassed, but she also knew something they didn't. She had been practicing for months. Maybe not on a real piano, but she knew the music in her bones. There was an old library in town with a small music room. It had an upright piano that nobody used much. Emily had seen it once during a school trip and never forgot it. She gathered the courage and asked the librarian if she could use it to practice. At first, the woman was unsure. But when Emily explained how much she wanted to prepare for the talent show, she smiled and gave her permission. "Only in the evenings, when the library is quiet," she said. Emily agreed immediately, and so began the most exciting and frightening 2 weeks of her life. Every evening, after finishing her homework and helping her mother, Emily would go to the library. She brought with her the notes she had copied from the internet, the tune she had composed by herself, and all the memory of those hours practicing on cardboard keys. The first time she placed her fingers on real piano keys, her hand shook. The sound was beautiful, but she was scared to mess up. She played slowly, trying to connect what she had imagined all these months to what she now heard with her ears. It wasn't perfect at first. She made mistakes. She got frustrated. But each day, she came back. The melody she was practicing was something she had created herself. It didn't have a name, but it told her story of being laughed at, of hoping, for more, of loving something that no one else could see. It started slow and gentle, like a whisper. Then it grew stronger, braver, like a voice finding its power. She didn't have sheet music for it. It was all in her head and her heart. As the show came closer, the teasing at school continued. Some students even started making jokes in front of her. "Don't forget to bring your invisible piano," one boy shouted as she walked past. Emily. Jess kept her eyes on the ground. The worst part was that even some of her classmates, the ones who were usually nice, stayed quiet. No one stood up for her. But she didn't stop practicing. On the morning of the talent show, Emily woke up early. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. She didn't eat much breakfast. Her mother helped her braid her hair and gave her a simple blue dress to wear. "No matter what happens," her mother said, holding her shoulders, "you're already brave for trying." Emily nodded but didn't speak. Her heart was thumping like a drum. She knew people expected her to fail. Maybe they were right. But something inside her told her to go anyway. That evening, the town hall was full. The stage was decorated with lights, and a big banner hung above it that said Annual Community Talent Night. Families, friends, neighbors, everyone was there. The seats were packed. The show had already begun. A boy did a magic trick. A girl sang a pop song. There was a group dance, a comedy act, and even a juggler. The crowd clapped and cheered for each one. Emily sat backstage, her hands cold and sweaty. She could hear the laughter, the music, the applause. Her name was coming up soon. When the MC finally called, "And next we have Emily, who will be performing a piano piece," she felt her legs go weak, but she stood up when she walked on too. The stage, as she stepped into the spotlight, she heard it giggles from the back of the room. A few whispers. Someone even muttered, "This is going to be painful." She saw a group of students from her school whispering and laughing. Her face turned red. Her hands shook. She walked slowly to the piano in the center of the stage. It looked huge. She pulled out the small paper with her notes and placed it near the keys, though she didn't really need it anymore. She sat down, placed her fingers. On the keys on paused. She took one deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and began to play. Emily sat in front of the piano under the bright lights of the stage. Her hands rested gently on the keys, and her heart pounded loudly in her chest. It felt louder than the sounds in the room. She could hear the whispers from the audience, and even though she didn't look up, she knew some people were laughing. She didn't need to see their faces to know what they were thinking. She had heard their comments in school. They didn't believe she belonged on that stage. But she had made it this far, and no matter how scared she felt, she wasn't going to run away. As she sat still, she remembered all those nights alone in her room, drawing piano keys on cardboard, imagining the sounds in her head. She remembered the library piano, the cold keys under her fingers, the times she made mistakes and cried when no one was watching. And now here she was. This moment had come because she never gave up. But in front of all these people, everything felt different. One boy in the audience chuckled loudly. Another whispered something, and a few students giggled. Their laughter felt like little cuts across her skin. Emily's cheeks burned, and for a second, her mind went blank. She forgot where to place her fingers. The fear grew inside her like a balloon about to pop. But then she remembered her mother's voice that morning. "No matter what happens, you're already brave for trying." That small sentence came back to her like a soft echo. She breathed in deeply and let her fingers touch the keys again. They were cold, but familiar. She had spent so many hours with those same shapes under her hands. She had memorized every note of the piece she had created. Slowly, her heart beat. Settled, the room was still, waiting. Some people looked bored. Some leaned forward, curious. A few kids still wore mocking smiles. And then, finally, Emily began to play. The first few notes were soft, like a quiet morning breeze. They floated through the hall gently, almost uncertainly. At first, the audience didn't react. Some still expected her to mess up. But Emily's fingers moved with care, just like they had in the library. She was nervous, yes, but she had practiced this piece so many times that her hands seemed to know what to do, even if her mind did. As the melody grew, the mood in the room began to change. The laughter stopped. The whispers faded. People started listening. Her piece began like a question, slow and thoughtful. Then it grew louder, as if answering that question with strength and pride. The notes danced and paused and rose again. There was pain in her music, but also hope. Felt like a story, one that had no words but spoke directly to the heart. Emily didn't look up. Her eyes stayed on the keys, but her heart was flying. What most people didn't know was that the song she was playing wasn't just any tune. It was her story. Every part of it, the soft beginning, the sudden sharp notes, the growing power came from her own journey. The sadness she had felt when others mocked her, the quiet courage she had when no one believed in her, the joy of finally touching a real piano, the feeling of being invisible but holding on to a dream anyway. All of it was inside the music. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, something magical had happened. The room was silent not because people were bored or confused, but because they were deeply moved. Parents who had come just to see their kids perform now watched Emily with wide eyes. Children who had laughed earlier were now sitting still, caught in the music. Even the boy who had chuckled at her performance announcement was no longer smiling. His head was tilted slightly, as if trying to understand what he was feeling. Emily's hands moved faster now, her fingers flying over the keys. The sound filled the hall, powerful and beautiful. She played with everything she had inside her. All the pain, all the practice, all the love she had for music hit was all there in every note. She wasn't just playing, she was telling her truth. At one point, a woman in the front row wiped a tear from her eye. A man beside her leaned forward, elbows on his knees, completely focused. Some people had never seen anyone play the piano in real life before, let alone a girl from their own town who had no formal training. But even those who knew about music could tell this wasn't ordinary. There was something raw and honest in Emily's performance that no lesson could teach. Backstage, the other performers were peeking out from behind the curtain. A teenage girl who had just finished singing whispered to another, "I had no idea she could play like that." Someone else replied, "She's incredible." A few of the boys who had made jokes before were now staring in silence. For the first time, Emily was not invisible. Still, Emily didn't know what was happening around her. She didn't know the audience was slowly falling in love with the music. She didn't know people had stopped checking their phones and started listening with their hearts. She didn't even know that one teacher in the audience had begun recording her on their phone, thinking that this performance needed to be remembered. All she knew was the music. Her hands were starting to hurt, but she didn't stop. Her fingers had pressed these keys 1,000 times in her imagination. Now they were pressing the real ones, and she was determined to finish what she started. The melody began to slow down. The power in the music gently faded into calmness again. It was like a storm that had passed, leaving behind peace and quiet. The final note hung in the air like a whisper. Emily lifted her fingers slowly, and the sound ended. For a moment, there was silence. Total silence. Emily sat frozen. She didn't know what to expect. Had she done something wrong? Was the audience shocked for the wrong reasons? Did they still think she was a joke and it happened? One person in the middle row stood up and began clapping. Another followed, and then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Some people whistled, others shouted, "Bravo!" The sound of applause filled the room like a wave, washing over Emily in a way that almost made her dizzy. She looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. All those people, mothers, fathers, children, teachers, classmates, were clapping for her, not out of politeness, not out of pity, but because they had truly felt something. Tears filled her eyes. She couldn't stop them. They rolled down her cheeks silently as she stood up and gave a small bow. Her hands were shaking, not with fear anymore, but with relief, joy, and something else, something new, confidence. She looked toward the crowd and saw her mother standing. In the back, eyes shining with pride, hands clapping above her head. Emily smiled, a real bright smile, and in that moment, she felt something she had never felt before, seen, heard, and accepted. Backstage, the other performers greeted her like a star. "You were amazing," one said. "That was beautiful," said another. Even the boys who had teased her looked awkward and mumbled things like, "Good job, and I didn't know you could do that." Emily didn't respond much. She just smiled. She wasn't angry at them. She wasn't even thinking about the past. All she could think about was the music still ringing in her ears, and the feeling of finally being understood. When the event ended, people came up to her one by one to shake her hand or thank her. A woman in her 40s said, "You reminded me why I used to love music," a teenage boy admitted. "I laughed when you walked on stage, but now I feel stupid." "You're a real artist." The MC came over and said, "I've seen this show for 10 years. I've never seen a performance move the crowd like that." Someone from the town committee asked if they could post her video on the local community page. Emily nodded, not realizing how much that would change everything soon. That night, Emily walked home with her parents. She didn't say much, but her mother held her hand tightly the whole way. Her father, who rarely showed emotion, patted her shoulder and said softly, "You did good, kid. That was enough, more than enough." At home, Emily went into her room and sat on her bed, still wearing her dress. Her fingers still tingled, and the memory of the piano's keys was fresh. She had done it. She had walked into a room full of doubt, full of laughter, and turned it into silence, then applause. She had told her story through music and people, had listened. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in her life, she believed that maybe, just maybe, her dream wasn't so impossible after all. After the applause finally faded and people began leaving the hall, Emily sat quietly backstage, still feeling the warmth of what had just happened. Her ears were still ringing from the loud claps, but inside, there was a strange calm. It was like a storm had passed, and now the sun was finally coming out. She couldn't believe it just a few minutes ago. She had been laughed at for touching the piano. Now people had stood up for her. They had clapped for her, cheered for her, even cried because of her music. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She just kept replaying the entire moment in her mind, the way her fingers moved across the keys, the way the crowd went silent, the sound of her own music filling the entire room. It had felt like magic. Maybe it was. Maybe that night had something special in it, something no one saw coming. Her parents waited for her at the back of the hall. Her mother opened her arms the moment she saw Emily, and they hugged tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered into her daughter's ear. "You made everyone feel something, even me." Emily smiled, her eyes watery again, and said softly, "I didn't think they'd like it." Her father, standing nearby, looked at her with something close to wonder in his eyes. "They didn't just like it," he said. "They were stunned. You changed that whole room." They walked home under the stars that night, and even though it was dark and quiet, Emily felt brighter than she ever had before. Something inside her had changed. She didn't feel small anymore. Didn't feel like the invisible girl who practiced on cardboard keys. She felt like someone who had found her voice. The next morning, Emily woke up early, even though it was Sunday. She hadn't slept much. Her mind had been too busy thinking about the performance. She kept wondering if it had all been a dream. But when she opened her phone, she knew it was very real. There were messages, lots of them, people from school. Neighbors, even someone from another town had sent her texts. Some were simple, like, "Wow," or "That was beautiful." Others were long, filled with kind words and apologies for doubting her. And then she saw something else. A video of her performance had been posted online. One of the teachers had uploaded it to the town's community page. The caption read, "Watch how this shy girl left an entire room speechless." The video already had hundreds of views. Comments were pouring in. "This girl is pure talent. Her music made me cry. I had no idea someone so young could play like this. Emily read each comment slowly, as if they were small gifts, and smiled. At school the next day, everything was different. The same hall she used to walk through quietly, hoping no one noticed her, now felt new. People looked at her with wide eyes, some smiled, some clapped when she walked past. A group of younger students waved excitedly, and even some of the older ones who had teased her before came up to say sorry. "We were wrong," one boy said, scratching his head awkwardly. "You're seriously talented." Emily nodded politely, still unsure how to handle this sudden attention. Her teachers were also full of praise. One of them, Mrs. Harper, the English teacher, called her to the front of the class and said, "Sometimes we expect the loudest voices to shine. But this weekend, Emily reminded us that sometimes quiet people carry the strongest light." The whole class clapped. Emily blushed deeply and looked at the floor, but inside her heart was dancing. Things at home changed too. Her parents, who had always supported her quietly, now spoke about her with pride. Her mother showed the video to neighbors and coworkers. Her father, who was usually serious, told the man at the grocery store, "That's my daughter on the piano." Emily felt shy when she heard him say it, but she also felt proud. That week, something unexpected happened. A local music teacher named Mr. Bennett called Emily's school. He had seen the video online and wanted to meet her. He ran a small music academy in the nearby city and had been teaching piano for more than 20 years. He told the school principal, "I've seen many young talents, but this girl, she has something rare. I want to offer her free lessons." When Emily heard about it, she couldn't believe it. Free lessons? With a real piano teacher? It felt like a dream. Her parents were surprised too, but they agreed without hesitation. So every weekend, Emily began traveling to the city for lessons. It was a 2-hour journey by bus, but she didn't mind. She sat by the window with her notebook full of music notes and practiced silently with her fingers on her lap. Mr. Bennett was kind and patient. He was amazed by how much Emily had already taught herself. "You've never had formal lessons?" he asked in disbelief. She shook her head. "Just YouTube, cardboard, and a library piano." He smiled. "Then you've already shown more dedication than many trained students. Let's build on that." Each week, Emily learned more. She practiced harder. Mr. Bennett taught her how to read sheet music properly, how to improve her technique, how to understand the emotions behind every note. He also helped her polish her original piece, the one she had performed at the talent show. "It's already beautiful," he told her. "But with a few changes, it could be unforgettable." Emily began performing at local events, school functions, and small concerts. People began to recognize her. "Aren't you the girl from that video?" they'd ask. "The one who surprised everyone?" She nodded shyly, but inside, she felt proud. Months passed, and the video of her performance kept spreading. It reached a local journalist who wrote an article titled, "From Cardboard Keys to Community Star, Emily's Musical Journey." The story touched many hearts. A popular television program invited her to play live. Emily had never even been inside a TV studio before, and now she was being given a piano on national television. She wore the same blue dress she had worn the night of the talent show, her lucky dress. When she played on TV, she remembered how it all started, how she had sat alone, pretending to play, and how she had almost walked off that stage in fear. But now she wasn't afraid. Her hands still shook, yes, but now it was from excitement, not fear. She played with her heart, and once again, she left the audience speechless. After the performance, she was asked in an interview, "How did you learn to play like that?" Emily smiled and said simply, "I just really loved it. And I never gave up." That sentence became famous. It was shared all over the internet. People started calling her the girl who never gave up. Children in other small towns who felt invisible saw her as a hero. Music teachers showed her video to their students, and Emily, she just kept playing, but she didn't forget the people who helped her. She often visited the library where she had practiced alone. She thanked the librarian who let her use the piano. She helped other students who wanted to learn music. She even gave free mini lessons to younger kids at school. If I could learn, she told them, you can too. She also forgave the ones who had laughed at her. Some of them became her friends later. One day, a girl who had once made fun of her came and said, I used to laugh because I was jealous. You were brave enough to chase a dream. I wasn't. Emily simply smiled and said, it's never too late to start. Her story was shared not just in her town, but across the country. Newspapers, websites, and even schools talked about her. But for Emily, the most beautiful part wasn't the fame. It was the fact that her music, something that had once lived quietly in her heart, had now reached others. It had made people feel something. It had brought smiles, tears, inspiration. She continued her lessons with Mr. Bennett and started writing new pieces. She wanted to make an album someday. She dreamed of performing on big stages, maybe even traveling the world. But no matter how far she went, she knew she would always remember where it all began, a small piece of cardboard, with a black marker and a big dream. That night at the talent show had changed everything. The laughs, the fear, the silence. The applause had all led to this new chapter in her life. And now, whenever she touched the piano, she no longer felt nervous. She felt powerful, like she was telling the world, I belong here. Emily's life was slowly turning into something she had only dreamed of before. Every time she looked at the piano, she smiled to herself. It wasn't just an instrument, anymore it was her friend, her voice, and her way of telling the world who she really was. From being a shy girl in a small town, laughed at for even trying, she had now become someone people looked up to. She had never asked for fame or attention. All she had wanted was a chance to play. But her honesty, her music, and her story had touched more hearts than she ever imagined. Even though she was now recognized by many, Emily didn't let success go to her head. She still helped her mom with dinner, still walked to school with her old backpack, and still practiced piano in the library whenever she had free time. Her parents had become more supportive than ever. Her mother started reading books about music just to understand her better. Her father saved part of his salary every month, saying, one day we'll buy you a piano for our home. These small things meant more to Emily than any applause or interview in school. Things were also different. Teachers gave her extra time to complete homework whenever she had music events. The students who used to ignore her now sat with her at lunch. Some even asked her for advice on music, on confidence, on how to be brave when no one believes. In you, Emily always smiled and said, I was scared too. But I just kept going. She didn't pretend to be perfect. She just stayed real. One day, Mr. Bennett, her music teacher, gave her some exciting news. There's a national-level youth music competition happening next month, he said, handing her a colorful brochure. It's in the capital city. Top young musicians from all over the country will be there. I think you should apply. Emily stared at the paper, her hands shaking slightly. This was bigger than anything she had ever done before. The idea of going to the capital city, competing with trained kids from famous schools, scared her. Do you think I'm good enough? She asked softly. Mr. Bennett looked at her seriously and said, You have something rare, Emily. You don't just play notes. You make people feel. It's something even professionals struggle with. You should go. She took the brochure home and showed it to her parents. Her father read every line slowly, then said, It will cost a bit, but if this is what you want, we'll make it happen. Her mother hugged her tightly and said, You've come this far. Don't stop now. For the next few weeks, Emily worked harder than ever. She practiced for hours every evening, improving her posture, her timing, her control. Mr. Bennett helped her choose a second piece for the competition, something more classical. You'll need variety, he said. Your original piece shows your heart. This one will show your skill. Emily didn't just want to win. She wanted to be better. Every note she played was filled with purpose. But deep inside, she still had doubts. Sometimes late at night, she would lie awake thinking about the other competitors. They would have expensive instruments, fancy clothes, years of professional training. Would they laugh at her too, just like people had at the town talent show? But every time fear tried to take over, Emily remembered how far she had come. She had played her first real piano only a few months ago. She had turned laughs into applause. She had made strangers cry with her music. Maybe she didn't have all the same things the others had, but she had heart. And that had to count for something. When the day of the competition finally came, Emily woke up before sunrise. Alma, her mother, had ironed her favorite blue dress. Her father packed sandwiches and water bottles for the long train ride. They couldn't afford to stay in a hotel, so they planned to return the same day. It would be tiring, but Emily didn't complain. She was too excited. The capital city was loud and busy. Tall buildings, honking cars, people rushing everywhere. It made her feel small again. The competition was being held in a huge auditorium. There were banners, security guards, a welcome desk. Emily had never been anywhere like this before. She held her mother's hand tightly and whispered, "What if I forget everything?" Her mother smiled and said, "Then you'll play what's in your heart, like you always do." Inside the hall, there were dozens of young performers. Some were stretching their fingers. Others were going through sheet music. Many wore elegant clothes and expensive shoes. Their parents looked confident, as if they had been doing this for years. Emily quietly sat in a corner, clutching her small folder of notes. A few girls nearby whispered and looked at her blue dress. One of them said, "She looks like she came from a village." Emily heard it but didn't respond. She had heard worse before. This time, she wasn't going to let it break her. When her name was called, her heart almost stopped. She stood up slowly, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the stage. The piano on this stage was the grandest she had ever seen. Its black surface shone under the lights, and its size made her feel even smaller. The judges sat at a long table, watching her closely. The audience was quiet, waiting. Emily took a deep breath, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. A moment she froze. The memory of being laughed at in her first performance came rushing back. But then she remembered what had happened after. The silence, the applause, the tears. She closed her eyes and began to play. First, her original piece, the one that had started it all. The room filled with its soft, emotional sounds. It told the story of a girl who had been ignored, doubted, laughed at, but who found strength. Through music, her hands moved smoothly, confidently. She didn't think about winning. She just let the music speak. Then came the classical piece. It was more difficult, with faster movements and complex patterns. But Emily had practiced every single note. Her fingers flew across the keys, never missing a beat. The judges nodded slightly, impressed. The audience was quiet again, just like that first night. They listened, really listened. When she finished, there was a pause, just a few seconds, but it felt like forever. Then the applause came. It wasn't wild like the small-town talent show. It was polite, professional, but it was real. Emily stood up, bowed, and walked off stage, her heart beating fast. Backstage, she sat alone again. She didn't know how well she had done. The other performers were talented. Their techniques were cleaner, their confidence stronger. But Emily had done her best. That's all she could control. Later that evening, the results were announced. Emily didn't win first place. That went to a boy from a music academy. But then, the judges called her name. Special Jury Award for Emotional Expression and Original Composition, Emily Walters. Her eyes widened. Her parents clapped proudly from their seats. She walked to the stage again, accepted the certificate, and smiled as people applauded. One of the judges came up to her afterward. He was an old man with kind eyes. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music as a boy," he said. "Your technique may still grow, but your solid's already there. Never stop playing." That night, on the train ride home, Emily sat by the window, the certificate resting on her lap. She watched the city lights disappear into the distance. She didn't care that she didn't win first place. What mattered was that her music had reached people again, strangers, professionals, judges. It had spoken louder than her fears. Her father sat beside her, reading the program booklet. Her mother gently rested her head on Emily's shoulder. It was quiet, peaceful. Emily looked at the stars through the window and smiled. The journey ahead was still long. There would be more challenges, more doubts, more people who might laugh. But now she knew something for sure. She could turn laughter into silence. and silence into applause. And she was just getting started. The train rocked gently as it moved through the dark night. Emily sat near the window, holding the certificate she had won at the national competition. Her parents sat beside her, both smiling quietly. They didn't speak much. Words weren't needed. The silence between them was warm and full of pride. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like her dream was no longer just in her heart. It was real, it was happening, and it had only just begun. When they reached home, it was almost midnight. The streets were empty, and the little houses in their neighborhood were quiet. Emily stepped into her small room, still wearing her blue dress. She sat on her bed, placed the certificate on the table, and looked around. The walls still had old drawings of piano keys she had made months ago. Her notebooks were still stacked on the corner shelf. Nothing had changed in the room, but something inside her had. She was not the same girl anymore. The next few days passed quickly. People in her town heard about her success. Her teachers were proud. Her classmates looked at her with new respect. And even strangers smiled when they saw her in the street. The local newspaper wrote another article about her, calling her the quiet girl who made the world listen. Emily didn't say much in interviews. She preferred to speak through her music. One morning, something unexpected happened. Envelope arrived in the mail. It was from a famous music school in the city. Emily opened it slowly, her hands shaking. Inside was a letter. The school had seen her performance video and read about her story. They were offering her a full scholarship to study piano under their mentorship program. She didn't have to pay anything, not for lessons, not for books, not even for travel. All they asked was that she come ready to learn, grow, and share her music. Emily stared at the letter for a long time. She read it again and again, tears forming in her eyes. Her parents were speechless. Her mother hugged her tightly, and her father simply placed a hand on her head. "You earned this," he said softly. The next few months were full of new beginnings. Emily started attending the music school in the city every week. It was a beautiful place, with grand rooms, shiny pianos, and students from many parts of the country. At first, Emily felt out of place. Most of the other students had been learning music since they were very young. They talked about composers she had never heard of and used fancy words she didn't understand. Some of them were friendly, but others looked at her like she didn't belong. But Emily didn't let that stop her. She knew what she had come for. She practiced harder than ever. Her teachers noticed how quickly she learned and how deeply she connected with every piece. One teacher said, "She doesn't just play the notes, she understands them." That's something you can't teach. Emily also started writing more of her own music. She carried a small notebook with her everywhere and wrote down ideas whenever they came. Sometimes on the bus, sometimes in the school library, sometimes even while walking through the city. Her music was full of emotions, sometimes happy, sometimes sad, sometimes hopeful. Her teachers encouraged her to perform her original pieces during recitals, and the audiences loved them. One day, during a school concert, a guest from a well-known music foundation heard her play. After the performance, he approached Emily and said, "Your music has truth in it. I'd like to help you record it." That meeting led to something Emily had never imagined: her very first album. It was a small album, just 6 pieces, all written and played by Emily. The title was simple: From Silence. She chose it because her journey had started with silence, silent struggle, silent dreams. But now, her music was loud enough to be heard by the world. The album was released online, and within a few weeks it started getting attention. People began sharing her music on social media, writing messages like, "This girl's music touches the soul. Her piano speaks louder than words." Some famous musicians even praised her work. One called her a young genius with an old soul. Emily still couldn't believe it. She remembered sitting alone in the library, playing quietly while the world outside rushed past. Now, people from different countries were listening to her music. One girl from Brazil sent her a message saying, "I cried listening to your piano. I don't know English well, but I understood everything." That message stayed with Emily. For a long time, it reminded her that music truly had no borders. Soon invitations began to come. Schools wanted her to speak to students. Music festivals wanted her to perform. Emily was shy about speaking on stage, but she tried her best. Didn't talk for long. She simply told her story at the cardboard piano, the laughter, the first performance, the applause, and the journey that followed. She always ended her speech by saying, "It doesn't matter where you start. What matters is that you keep going." Evening, Emily returned to the same community hall where it all began. She had been invited to perform as a guest at the town's next talent show. She stood on the same stage, looked at the same rows of chairs, and smiled. This time, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid of laughter. She sat at the piano and played the very same piece she had played that first night. But now, it sounded fuller, richer, more confident. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Many of them had been there the first time too. They remembered the shy girl who had been laughed at, and they were clapping for the young artist who had grown into something special. After the show, a little girl came up to her. She looked about, 10 years old, and held a small notebook in her hands. "I want to learn piano too," she said, "but I'm scared people will laugh at me." Emily knelt down, looked into her eyes, and said, "Let them laugh, then show them what you can." "Do?" That night, Emily walked home slowly, thinking about how far she had come. She thought of the people who had doubted her and the people who had believed in her. She thought of the hours of practice, the nights of doubt, and the moments of joy. And she thought of the music. The music she knew the journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more mistakes, more things to learn. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had found her place in the world, and it was behind the piano. Years later, Emily became a professional pianist and composer. She traveled 2 different countries, performed on big stages, and worked with talented artists. But she never forgot her roots. She returned often to her hometown, held workshops for children, and donated pianos to schools that didn't have them. She even helped turn the old library room into a small music center where anyone could come and play. Her parents remained her biggest fans. They still lived in the same house, but now a real piano stood in Emily's room, the one her father had promised to buy. Sometimes, when she visited home, Emily sat at that piano and played while her mother cooked nearby. Oh, those were her favorite moments, simple, quiet, full of love. Emily's story inspired thousands, people who felt small, people who had been laughed at, people who had dreams but no support. They saw themselves in her journey, and Emily never stopped encouraging them. She always said, "Even if no one believes in you, believe in yourself. That's where everything begins." And so, the girl who was once laughed at for touching a piano had become someone the world listened to. Not because she had the best training or the most expensive instrument, but because she played with her heart. She played with honesty, courage, and love. And that made all the difference. Let me know if you want me to create another true real-life story in 5 parts based on a new title.